Welcome, everyone. I'm very glad that you could join us for today's Indiana State Library's online conference, Hot Topics for a Cold Winter's Day. My name is Paula Newcomb, and I'm the Northeast Regional Coordinator for the Indiana State Library's Professional Development Office. I will be the host and question moderator for today's webinar, Library Community Partnerships, presented by Kelly Krieg-Sigman, retired director of the La Crosse Public Library in Wisconsin. Due to my problem with my voice, we're probably also going to have Kara Cleveland in there as well doing some moderation. So I really appreciate her for doing that today. After the webinar has been transcribed, it will be available on the Indiana State Library's Archive Webinars page. If you are watching an archived recording of this presentation, information on how to obtain your LEU is in the video's description in YouTube. For weekly updates on upcoming trainings and to learn more about what's happening in libraries across the state, please subscribe to the Indiana State Library's e-newsletter, The Wednesday Word, and check our continuing education website for other professional development opportunities. All right, I have the distinct honor and privilege to introduce Kelly Krieg-Sigman. She is the former director of the La Crosse Public Library in Wisconsin. Kelly has spent over 34 years in the library business and decided to make a change and retire in 2019. I first saw Kelly in 2015 when she gave the keynote presentation for the ILF District 3 conference in Kendallville. I thought she had great energy and lots of humorous stories. I also learned that she does historic portrayals for the local historical society, which I thought was really cool. Well, I next saw her at the Evergreen Annual Conference in 2016. She was also the keynote for that. I don't remember the specific topic of her presentation, but I do remember something about maybe ping pong balls or beach balls or balloons. I can't remember. She'll have to tell us. But she didn't end up using them because she didn't want to hurt the chandeliers. I really appreciate she didn't want to hurt the chandeliers, but I really kind of wanted to see what was going to happen. That's okay. And now later that year in 16, I also heard her speak at the Small and Medium-Sized Libraries Conference, and man, did they keep her busy. She had 4 presentations. I believe she was there both days, and I thoroughly enjoyed them. One was on the multi-generational workplace, and she split us up into groups by generation. We went over a few general traits for each of the generations. The other one was communication overload. I learned that a whole lot of history happened before Facebook. This is true. Also, Hershey's. Motivation is a moving target and changes through the years, and everyone breathes different motivational oxygen, which I thought was just right on point. The last one I heard was what turns space into place. What is left if you take the L out is pace. So playfulness, atmosphere, comfort, and environment. So as you could probably tell, Kelly really has inspired me. I really appreciate her presenting style. She's fun, humorous, doesn't take herself too seriously, and she doesn't rely on PowerPoint. That is amazing. I want to be more like Kelly. So at this point, without further ado, I am now happy to turn the presentation over to Kelly Krieg-Sigman.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Paula, thank you very much for that very gracious introduction. And thank you again for the opportunity to speak with colleagues in Indiana. As a start to my remarks this afternoon, and maybe a little bit of wisdom, I want to have you all imagine, Paula, how many people are actually listening right now? How many people signed in?
40 people.
40 people. I want the 40 of you to imagine that instead of sitting in the comfort of your bed like Allison is, or sitting in the comfort of your office in your sweatpants like I am, you're actually at a conference. And you've just walked into the room for this presentation, and half of you have been handed a bolt, and the other half of you have been handed a nut. And I stand up in front of you and I say, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Before I begin my remarks, please go and find the nut or bolt that mates with yours. Now, the first time I did this, I had about 75 people in the room. And it took a long time. It took a long time, number one, because that's a lot of people. But it also took a long time because I had deliberately made sure that not every nut matched every bolt. And I referred to this exercise throughout the rest of my comments about the challenges that people in library land face when we start talking about these partnerships. Now, for those of you who have heard me speak before, and now I'm trying to figure out how to change the slide. Anybody got a clue on that one? There we go. I am pleased to report that there's been some improvements since I made this presentation the first time. When I first did this presentation, partnership in public library land was the buzzword. It was, find a partner, find a partner, find a partner. For those of you who have heard me speak before, you know that frequently I like to go back to the actual definition of the word itself. So when we talk about partnership, here's what you want to keep in mind, and please pay a special attention to the words that are in blue. It's an arrangement where people agree to cooperate to advance their mutual interests. So it's an agreement and an arrangement, and you agree to cooperate, and it has to advance the mutual interests of both parties. So one of the underlying assumptions here is that if you're going to go into a partnership, you are agreeing to cooperate, and you actually know what your interests are and how they might blend comfortably and effectively with those of the potential partner. What partnerships aren't? Now, the three quotes you see on the screen right now, the first two I have heard over the course of my career easily a dozen times. In fact, I had one organization call me up one day less than 36 hours before the grant was due, wanting me to write a letter of support for whatever the project was, and I will admit I was a little abrupt. You can't just suddenly reach out to the library and say, hey, I need a partner, would you write a letter to support it? The second quote has been a favorite of board members over the years. We've proposed a new program or a new service, and inevitably somebody either elected or appointed will say, well, can't you get a partner to pay for this? In other words, forget about the idea of it being in mutual interests or cooperating, just find somebody else to write the check. And finally, anything that is midstream or last minute. Unless you as the library are involved at the very beginning of the planning, it is not a partnership. When I talk about partnerships, frequently I am reminded of a dating analogy. Again, going back to the nuts and bolts exercise, sometimes I've been in situations where it felt like speed dating. Oh, we got to find a partner. Other times I was thrust into a partnership without even knowing anything about the other partner. Partnerships, this conversation can also lend itself frequently to marriage because, believe me, there's a lot of parallels between successful, unsuccessful marriages and successful and unsuccessful library partnerships. But as you think about your partnerships, ones that you've already established, ones that you want to have, here are the big 6 bullet points. When you are looking to improve or advance library services and programs, what are the overarching goals of your organization versus the potential partner? And when I give you some examples later on in this presentation, I'll be giving some very specific examples as to what I mean here. Number 2, what's going to be the level of give and take? Again, it's kind of a corny analogy, but a marriage works the same way. Who does the laundry? Who does the dishes? Who's going to have to give a little more on this piece of the partnership as opposed to a different piece of the partnership. If the partnership is successful, does one party in the partnership have to do most of the front work and then just sit back and reap the rewards? So what will be the levels of give and take? Areas of responsibility and lines of authority almost work together. And in some cases, the partnership opportunities that have been presented to me over the years, this is where things fell apart. Because either nobody wanted to be responsible or everybody wanted to be responsible. Either nobody wanted to be in charge or everybody wanted to be in charge. So these kinds of areas, these kinds of issues have to be hammered out at the beginning. The fifth one, of course, is how are you going to evaluate your success? What are going to be the measurements? Is it going to be something beyond just increasing circulation? What are you really looking to have happen? And then finally, that all important, especially for funding authorities, the return on investment. And again, I have a very good example from my experience that will show you the pleasures and pitfalls that can happen with that specific last area of concern. So those are the 6 things to have in front of you as soon as you start having a conversation with a potential partner. And again, right in the same wheelhouse, your success will depend on these things. So let's, again, and not that much different from parenting or being in a marriage. Constantly communicating to determine potential partners. Going back to that exercise that I laid out at the beginning, as you're working the room trying to find your partner, it can take a long time and you have to be constantly communicating with all the other people in the room looking for that partner. And this is a tough one. I have found over the years for a number of library employees, especially managers, because we're not always the most aggressively outgoing people, but you have to constantly be communicating either overtly or sometimes more subtly, and always listening for those opportunities to partner with a compatible organization or entity or group. Always listening at church, always listening at school meetings, always listening at, if you're a member of a Rotary Club or an Optimist Club or the Chamber of Commerce, always listening and communicating to determine and identify potential partnership opportunities, no matter how small or big the project may be. And then, of course, after you find a suitable partner, constantly communicating with them as you develop, as you start putting together your plans, start determining those levels of give and take, so on and so forth. The third one is, in my experience, the one that is the hardest to arrive at, because for so long, it seems, I was out running my library looking for partners to make sure that the community knew that we were vital, that we were engaged with the community. And I really, a number of times, did not have a real clear vision of my own library's interests, much less the interests of the potential partners. So you have to do a lot of talking to yourself and perhaps talking to some of your staff and some of your colleagues and certainly board members to determine, is this really in the library's best interest? Are you being approached, or have you approached somebody else? And you can't really answer the question, well, what's my interest here and what's your interest here, and are they mutually compatible? Next item, of course, the right resources, and that does not mean all the time money. And I'm going to give you a couple of great examples of what I mean by that further on in the presentation. Finally, And again, it sounds as if it's so obvious until you actually get into the heat of the moment and you suddenly think to yourself, why did I get myself into this? Patience and diplomacy. Remember that it is highly probable that you are forming a partnership with another entity or an organization that doesn't necessarily understand library people, library operations, library philosophy. So it's going to take a lot of patience and diplomacy occasionally to let them know who you are, and then you learn who they are. And again, I would go back to the dating analogy. Things look attractive at first sight, but now we have to find out and be patient and ask questions and listen and have coffee together and listen some more and really be diplomatic to make sure that the partnership is the right partnership and is it sustainable. So let's talk about partnerships that I personally have been a part of over the years and how I walked through these concepts that I've just presented. Now, one cautionary note, ladies and gentlemen, I'm fairly certain that many of you are probably in medium to small organizations. And a couple of these examples like this one are not going to be real easy for you to do simply because that's not who your organization is. And I apologize, that's Clyde the dog who's decided to make his presence known. Anybody want a dog? He's 13 pounds of attitude. So let's talk about this first example. The La Crosse Public Library is extremely fortunate in that we exist in a city that is very proud of its history and has put their money where their mouth is over the years and created an archives and local history department. It is the only public library in the state of Wisconsin outside of Milwaukee that has a separate department of that type. So a number of years ago, we started talking within the archives and local history department, what could we do to promote community history? What could we do to demonstrate the value of the archives department? What could we do to provide an engaging experience? All those things that you see on the left-hand side of the slide right now. Those were our overarching goals. So we came up with what we now call the Dark La Crosse Project, which started off as a walking tour in downtown La Crosse. Then we added some content to it and partnered with the Convention and Visitors Bureau and put it on the trolley. But the centerpiece, the crown jewel of the thing, is the stage performance that we put together and started 5 years ago. We put together a slideshow, a PowerPoint slideshow with music and costumes and lighting where we highlighted the sordid side of the city, the murders, the red light district, the rogues that we had. We had one guy who was nothing but a snake oil salesman, but we liked him so much we elected him mayor 4 times. So we created this thing to put on stage. So then the question became, well, how? Where? The library wasn't equipped for something like this. We wanted to generate some revenue. In other words, we wanted to have tickets. So we reached out to the Pump House Regional Arts Center, which is, as the name would suggest, it was the old 19th century water pump house in the city that's been preserved. So we sat down and the very first thing we did was lay out what you see in front of you. What were the overarching goals and did they make sense? Did it pass, I guess, for lack of a better phrase, did it pass the smell test? Did it make sense to reach out and work with the Pump House Regional Arts Center? And through all this communication that I've already talked about and more communication, we came to the conclusion that yes, this would work for us. So The good news on that is that we kicked it off, and so we moved on to the next part. Who was going to do what? What was going to be the give and take? What could we do that the pump house couldn't do? What could the pump house do that we couldn't do? And again, here it was. We wanted to use it as a fundraiser. The pump house needed to turn a profit. We had no experience in ticketing. They already had that apparatus in place. They knew how to work with performance contracts. They had the space and they had the major marketing resources. However, they didn't have the community connections that we did. So as things worked out, we did the job of getting sponsorships to help offset the cost, and we churned it out. Our first year, we did 5 performances. Every single one of them sold out. And I'll talk a little bit more in a minute about where we are today with this. So again, those points that I started out with, here's how we answered them. Here's how we worked through it. So there we go. The evaluation and the ROI. We've had sellout crowds every year that we've done it now. We've had online evaluation. We've actually measured an increased use in the archives department. We absolutely reached a new audience. The pump house adores us because not only were their costs covered, but they turned a profit as well. The event went very smoothly, and it did draw people's attention to other things that the pump house was doing. So in terms of the single best example I can give you of what a library community partnership can look like, I would point to this, because this has springboarded now into other related projects for the Convention and Visitors Bureau. I myself have even been contracted occasionally for private, if you will, little versions of the Dark Lacrosse Project for specific conventions that have been in town. The problem with this example is that it's a big one. And if you don't have those kinds of services in your library or in your region, this would be significantly harder to do. So let me give you the opposite. Another example that was so simple, we couldn't believe that we didn't do it before. We have a hunger task force in the city. Again, just for framework, La Crosse is about 55,000 people. We are, however, the largest city in about a 60 to 75 mile radius. And we're also the county seat. So a lot of county and federal services come out of La Crosse. So we have a larger than average vulnerable at-risk population. And the Hunger Task Force organization here in town, regrettably, has been kept very, very busy over the last few years. But they had some real needs. They were concerned about their lack of visibility. They were concerned that they really weren't reaching the people who needed them the most because they didn't really have an accessible, well-known location. Now, this partnership started again almost 8 years ago now, and came as a result of one of the library staff members listening and constantly communicating with people she knew about potential partners. This particular staff member is very passionate about things like locally grown food and doing, having the community take care of itself as much as it can. And she just happened to be in a conversation with someone who worked at the Hunger Task Force. And before we knew it, she was in my office saying, hey, could the Hunger Task Force distribution truck come here once a week during the summer and give their food away? Once we did the groundwork of talking to them and creating the schedule, this particular partnership runs itself. They show up every Monday during the growing season. All we have to do is make sure that it's publicized in an ongoing way on our website and on our calendar. And again, we the library became identified as a valuable location. So we had the real estate, they had the stuff, and it really has worked out well. I know that over the years we've had new library cards issued because people were there. Like it or not, we had bathrooms. So coming in to go to the bathroom, they also stopped to get a library card. This was an incredibly easy thing to put together. It just, and because of that, we knew it was going to be a good, sustainable partnership. So this might be something for some of you to consider, especially if you have a region-wide or a county-wide food distribution group or groups. Consider leveraging your real estate and your centralized location to help with something like this. Now I'm going to bore you to tears, as I can give you a bazillion more examples just to kind of spark some interest. Many of these could easily be modified and downsized to fit smaller communities. So let's talk about what you see on the screen right now. Give a gift. Now this is one that I struggled with initially because of the return on investment. Oh, thank you, Susie. Nice. Hey, just so you guys know, we're working on this year's performance. It's going to be the first 2 weekends in November, and it's going to be the best of. So if you really want to see the results of our work on this, come to La Crosse sometime this November, and and come see it. I'll even buy you your first glass of wine at the pump house before the show. So give a gift. This raised a lot of eyebrows when we first started it because it was an enormous amount of staff time. Here's how it works. Every November, first weekend, we put out, or I keep saying we, I'm retired, but the library put out about $10,000 worth of new books. And we decorated the library all up with, fancy, gold and black and holiday things and twinkly lights and all the staff dressed up. And we served hors d'oeuvres and we served wine and we invited people to come in, have a glass of wine and have some hors d'oeuvres and listen to the music and then look at the books that we had on sale. And then literally buy a book or books where those books then would be added to our collection. And they would be able to handwrite an inscription on a custom-made book plate for all these books. They would pay list price. We, of course, would pay our discount price. And the difference is what would pay for the food and the music and the decorating and so on and so on and so on. We started it the fall of 2003. After this past November, over those 16 years, well over $300,000 worth of new materials has been put on the shelf, and it has built itself up now to a holiday tradition. And the thing that helped this work was the fact that we partnered with our downtown Main Street organization, who on the same night has their holiday open house. So there's all sorts of traffic in downtown La Crosse. People have made this an event on their calendar to officially start off their holiday season. 2 years ago, because this was working so well collectively, we found out from the school district, and Kimberly, I will be getting to that in just a second. Thank you for asking. Because we heard from the school district that their classroom libraries were in horrible shape, we reached out to them, and 2 years ago, we added a table at Give a Gift of grade appropriate paperback books that the teachers wanted to have in their classrooms. So in addition to putting new books on the shelf at the library. For 2 years running now, we have put over $20,000 worth of new paperbacks in the 4th and 5th grade classrooms in the La Crosse School District. That partnership has opened many other doors for us in terms of collaborative work with the school district to meet our mutual interests. The Cooley Parenting Magazine, again, was a very, very limited term partnership, but for a couple of years, because we gave them information and helped underwrite some of their, bought some advertising, they did a couple of specialty articles on us and donated back some of the money in terms of just straight cash donations for specific children's programs. National History Day and the La Crosse History Photograph book, I'm going to kind of step away from because both of those were intimately connected again to our archives and local history department. But if anyone would like to hear more about those, I'd be happy to talk about them at the end of the presentation. The Java Vino book chats. Now this was a stealth one. I never thought this was going to be as big a deal as it's turned into. Java Vino is, as you might guess from the name, a coffee wine shop with food that opened up about 8 years ago. And I did not realize it until relatively recently that the ownership is all women. And so much of their customer base is women. And when my Reader's Advisory librarian found out about that, she talked to the ownership and started doing weekly, I'm not going to call them book talks, they were more book chats, where the library facilitated the table and for the first couple times bought the first round of coffee out of our programming budget and invited readers to come and chat about what they were reading at the time. And as the group started to develop and expand, then the library, through our Reader's Advisory librarian, started doing more theme work. In other words, a given book chat, the theme of the books being read would have to be a specific thing. We started producing lists of all the books that were mentioned and annotated them. And people started making friendships over the table, over a cup of coffee at Java Vino at these book chats. And in return, of course, Java Vino had more business in their establishment, and they thanked us by giving us gift certificates that we would offer up as a drawing for everybody who came to a particular book chat. I already kind of talked about the trolley tours. We took the content of the walking tour and expanded it, and we've been doing trolley tours now for about 5 summers with the Explore La Crosse Convention and Visitors Bureau. If you can't make it to La Crosse this November for the stage production, you might consider coming to La Crosse this summer during one of the Dark La Crosse trolley tours, because now that I'm retired, I am going to be doing all of them. I will be the guide on all of the Dark La Crosse trolley tours this summer. The Convention and Visitors Bureau love us because, again, it's another thing they can offer to people who are coming here for conventions, weddings, family reunions, graduations, etc. AARP. And Kimberly, please feel free to chime in on the chat box with any additional questions you may have. This was what I would consider to be my first really successful effort at a partnership in La Crosse, and it started back in 2003. And I have to say that it was already kind of in place in that the AARP income tax volunteers had carved out a little corner in the library and were doing a little bit of that income tax support. I met the man who was coordinating it, and I knew immediately that there could be a really powerful partnership here because he was a retired engineer and was extremely organized in his thinking and had the vision of what this could grow into. So we took it from just a table in one side of the library to what is today, let's see, my last full year last year, the AARP income tax volunteers filed, I think, over 1,700 returns. They take over a huge empty space that we created for them. Our IT department sets up their computers for them. We coordinate the reservations for the income tax appointments. It is, in fact, I have to say, for about 2.5 to 3 months out of the year, it is 50 to 75% of what one of the full-time librarians does, is just taking all of that, coordinating it, making sure that the information's getting out, making sure that the volunteers are being lined up to answer the phones and make the reservations. We even, one of the AARP volunteers was a retired computer engineer. He wrote a software program for all of the reservations. Here we go. Yes, Michael, for the coordination of the appointments, did you need to get additional phone lines? We were lucky enough to have kind of an unused line because, of course, the main library in La Crosse has a bunch of lines coming in. If you're a smaller library, you definitely would have to get an additional phone line. And again, this took 2-3 years to get it through people's heads. We put voicemail on it. And the voicemail message was very strategically written to say, we do experience high volume. Please leave your name and phone number, and we will have a volunteer get back to you. Because yeah, you get slammed. You absolutely get slammed. But you got to be ready for it, and you have to be consistent in your communication, both to your partner on this and to your colleagues on staff, so that they know to expect this. And I'm seeing what Karen has written, if you put the voicemail on for tax service, the other thing is you darn well better make sure that you do get back to the people within 24 to 36 hours and not leave them hanging out in no man's land. Because they, as you all know, some of them will get testy. Now, the good news about this, from my experience, is if you've done this now for 3, 4, 5 years, your regulars, if you will know this, they will tell others, and they will help alleviate some of the stress and pressure that those first couple, 3, 4 days, week will be. The trickiest part about this partnership, really, is communication in crisis. And by crisis, I mean, last year, I don't know if they remember, and Michael, I'll answer that question in just a second. Last year, Wisconsin experienced the polar vortex. So for the first and only time in my career, I actually had to close the library because my automatic doors on the main building kept freezing shut. And it was, of course, was during tax season. So how do you communicate to not only the AARP volunteers, but also to all the people that had signed up that day? That was a bit of a challenge. Now, fortunately, again, we had designated staff resources for this, so it wasn't too much of a mess up. But that, again, go back to those basic areas of concern that I laid out at the beginning. Communicate, who's an authority, who's got the responsibility. What the best thing to do in these conversations is to start with the phrase, what do we do if? And then figure out from there. Now, are they doing the taxes at the library? Yes, they are, Michael, and that's part of the computerization of this. The AARP volunteers are all trained to file online. AARP takes care of all of that, and then people make their appointments. When they make their appointments, the volunteers answering the question or making the reservation for them ask them or tell them, please bring last year's returns, please make sure you bring these forms, and then the appointments themselves are about an hour. Now, also bear in mind, everyone, this particular service is not for somebody with complicated returns. Now, AARP, because we had this conversation at the state level a number of times, AARP really can't say no to anybody, but they can strongly, through their communications and through the volunteers answering the phone, suggest to people that if you've got a complicated tax return with real estate and this and that and the other thing, the AARP service is not for you. It really was designed originally for seniors, particularly low-income seniors and low-income others, so that they can have a chance at getting their refund back. I don't remember the last number that was put in front of me, but I remember that last year the AARP income tax coordinator tallied up the amount of money in returns that had come back to the city of La Crosse as part of this program over the last 10 years, 12 years, whatever. And it was a significant amount. It was, I think it was a little over $1 million. Now that's a pretty good bunch of money coming back into the community for, through this partnership. And I had this nightmarish fear that before I could retire, something was going to happen that was going to make me have to stop this partnership. And I didn't want to have to face all the people because it really has been an excellent, excellent service to the community. Because I know for a fact that many of the people who have used this service every year would not be getting their taxes in on time or accurately if it weren't for the commitment of these volunteers. And they really are good. But again, it took us 17 years to get there. But you have to start someplace. So I hope, Michael and Kimberly, that kind of gives you the information you're looking for. If you wanted to pursue it, I'd be happy to reach out to to the gal who is coordinating it this year and give her your contact information and have her contact you with any questions. Yeah, Kim, good luck with it. It's really, it can be very successful. Now, you might be going home in the evening frequently during the first year having an extra glass of wine because it's been kind of stressful, because it is. It's setting something like this up is not easy, but it's an invaluable service. And again, going back to those overarching goals, it is something that really the library is ideally positioned to provide within a community, no matter what the size. Now, the last one, the Franke Foundation Care and Share, this was a great partner for a while, but it sunsetted because of things beyond our control. The Franke Foundation, as you might guess from the name, was a foundation in town that was committed to helping create situations where not-for-profit organizations could be thrown in a room together and get to know each other better so that they could better partner with each other discover potential partnership opportunities. So they reached out to us, and for about 6 years, the library hosted their Care and Share event, where we had about 85 different nonprofits show up at the library and have a table with their their handouts and their cool stuff. Here's who we are, and their brochures. And for every dollar that was, and then we would open this up to the community, and you would invite people to come and learn about the not-for-profits. And if people wanted to make cash donations that day to the nonprofit of their choice, the Franke Foundation would match it up to a certain level. So these were really big foot traffic days for the main library here in La Crosse. It was an excellent chance for, again, the nonprofits to look at each other and get to know each other better. And it worked really, really well until the Franke Foundation executive directors needed to retire, and the foundation's assets got subsumed by a larger community foundation who decided to take those monies and that funding in a different direction. So the last Care and Share was a year ago, I believe. But that's not to say that a smaller library in a community that maybe has 12 or 15 or 20 nonprofits couldn't consider doing something like this on a smaller scale, where again, the library leverages their visibility and their real estate to bring in other nonprofits as an opportunity to open up communication and start better identifying those mutual interests and mutual goals. Give me a minute, ladies and gentlemen. I need to take another swig of coffee. Now, again, to kind of put this in if you didn't like the nuts and bolts example, maybe you'll like this one better. My world famous peanut butter and jelly sandwich. I do a presentation on job descriptions and interviewing, where I am, and I don't think I've ever done it for Indiana, Paula, where I start the presentation off by saying something along the lines of, thank you for inviting me. I'm very honored, and I've been having a good time. But I need to tell you something. I make the world's greatest peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and I would be professionally remiss if I did not share with you the ingredients of my world famous peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And then I proceed to make a bourbon old fashioned in front of the audience. And I talk about it. It's all in terms of a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, but at the end of the exercise, it's clearly not a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And by the time I get done with it, half the people in the audience are usually thinking I've fallen completely off my rocker. And then I say to the audience, well, why isn't this my world famous peanut butter and jelly sandwich? I'm telling you it is. Why isn't it? And usually within 45 seconds, someone in the audience will say, well, because it doesn't have the right ingredients. So when you are looking at partnerships, do the ingredients of the person and the organization match the recipe of the job, the goal, the project, the idea? Do you have the right ingredients on both sides to be successful with the recipe? So, again, what are the ingredients? I cannot stress enough, ladies and gentlemen, on the organizational side, that you have a supportive foundation. And I don't mean a foundation that gives you money. I mean an organizational foundation. Your staff is behind it. Your board is behind it. Your elected officials are at least non-damagingly neutral about it. I could never have pulled off the Give a Gift, The archives department could have never pulled off Dark Lacrosse if it hadn't been for the fact that we worked and worked and worked through communication and more communication and more communication, and made sure that everybody supported the idea. We've had suggestions for partnerships in the past where a staff member or a board member said, "Oh, you really ought to work with these people," and everybody else involved just kind of looked and said, "Well, no, why?" And let me give you another example. One just popped into my head. One of the other successful partnerships La Crosse Public Library has created is the adult story time, which happens once a month at the Turtle Stack Brewery in La Crosse. Now, this one we had to be really careful about because we didn't want it to become perceived as a drink fest. But because the Turtle Stack Brewery had a small, tasting room, and Jenna, I will answer your question in just a second. Good question. We wanted to make sure that people understood that this was fun, that we were not encouraging drunkenness, but that there is a lighter atmosphere, and we wanted people to enjoy themselves. So we had to make very sure that the library board and senior management backed this, and we're given the Susie, stop. We're given the communications tools to be able to respond effectively to any potential community outcry. And we got a little kickback. We really did. But the value to the organization in terms of reaching, again, new people, different people, and allowing people to stand up at an open mic and read either their own works or something that was particularly meaningful or impactful to them. The Turtle Stack Brewery loved it because, again, once a month we packed the house for them. And by packed the house, we had between 50 and 60 people, which in a small tasting room was pretty darn good. Now, Jenna, to your question about an MOU, the answer is yes and no. For some of the partnerships, like the Hunger Task Force, we didn't need that. For others now, like the Dark Lacrosse performances at the Pump House, yes, we have a contract. We have a contract with them every year so that it's very clear who is responsible for what and what percentage of the ticket sales will be given to the library. So the more in-depth, the more rich and nuanced the project and the partnership, the more important it will be for you to have something in writing so that everybody knows. Even if it's just initially notes from the meetings that you have. Okay, we talked about this, we talked about that. Lock them in an email file somewhere so that you can go back to that and refer to it. But as it becomes bigger, as it becomes more complicated perhaps, yeah, definitely get yourself something in writing. But again, if it's something like the Hunger Task Force coming onto the property once a week with their truck, the only question I was challenged with on that was liability. And because the library is already city property and already covered for anything and everything that might happen on city property, it was not a concern. So the organization must be supportive. And they also, ladies and gentlemen, must be supportive, and I'm almost running out of time, aren't I, Paula? They also must be supportive in library staff taking the time to do it. Okay, so have time to prepare and give people permission to fail. Personally, as you yourselves are out there trying to create partnerships, trying to foster partnerships, you got to have those 4 things, especially the last one. If you cannot deal with a little bit of unknown, it's going to be harder and harder for you to, to make those partnerships work. Now, I had one last slide, and I lost it, so I don't know what is happening. Oh, there we go. One last slide because it was my favorite quote. Come on, baby. There we go. So let that be your guideline. I love that, and I love the fact that it came from Warren Buffett. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. I'm sorry we've got like 3 minutes for questions, I think.
That's great, Kelly. Thank you so much for doing this for us. I apologize. I accidentally hit something there at the end. I apologize for that.
I'll make one more fast comment to the attendees. You've got my email. Don't be afraid to email me questions. And if you are interested, I am still available to come and do workshops and seminars and so forth. Paula can give you further information if you need to. So if you would like me to come and actually do this one with the nuts and bolts, let's talk, because it is a lot of fun.
Lots of good information. Thank you, Kelly.
You are welcome, Paula. Take good care of yourself.
Thanks a lot, Kelly. Now you have to remind. So with that one presentation, was it ping pong
You bet.
balls or was it beach balls? What was it? Okay.
Yeah, it was ping pong balls and beach balls. And it's my coping with change. The ping pong ball versus the beach ball philosophy in coping with change. Oh, and something just came in from Indianapolis with a thank you. Well, thanks, guys. You're the best. All right.
All right. Make sure that you download your certificate. We also have the link for the survey. And of course, we have Kelly's contact information there in the bottom window. Also, thank you to all of you who have joined us for our first Indiana online conference, Hot Topics for a Cold Winter Day. You will get a follow-up email with the recording and the information that has been shared, as well as the certificate. So thank you for attending.